For generations, our tribe has called the Inland Empire region our home. We take pride in supporting our neighbors and the world around us. As one of the largest employers in the area, committed to the growth and prosperity of our community, we work to support many important local causes. Our tribe will always be here for this community, honoring our history, celebrating our culture, building a brighter future for us all.
This is Indian Country Today.
Esquili, yes, and thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Tholahungva. Here are the headlines for Thursday, October 8th. A severe hospital bed shortage in South Dakota is affecting the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe. 2 patients were turned away by 14 facilities. The patients who need treatment for COVID-19 had to go to a hospital in Minnesota. This comes as South Dakota's top health officials insist the state has plenty of hospital capacity. Danette Sir, Director of Nursing at the Cheyenne River Sioux Health Department, said the tribe depends on larger facilities when infections worsen. Chairman Harold Frazier cited the small size of its own facility plus the remote location as reasons why the tribe instituted strict lockdowns, and that included roadblocks. About 19% of the 258 people who have died from COVID-19 in South Dakota have been Native American. Tribal citizens make up nearly a quarter of hospitalizations statewide. And in North Dakota, Indigenous people face similar challenges when seeking treatment for the virus. The New York Times report also showed that in the past week, North Dakota has more new reported cases per capita than any other state. A bill to make it easier for tribal health authorities to access vital public health data is making its way through Congress. The measure passed by the U.S. House would remove barriers to that data. It would also give tribal health officials a better picture of COVID-19's disproportionate impacts. Experts say state and federal health data has been denied to tribal epidemiology centers for years. The centers have been designated public health authorities independent of tribal governments and have the same legal rights to federal data as states and counties. In 2015, the CDC reaffirmed that designation, but the center's leaders say they've been denied the information for years because the CDC cites federal health privacy laws. CDC Director Robert Redfield says the problems would be fixed once secure data systems are in place. In our coverage of the Native Vote 20, Indian Country Today is following the races of 14 American Indian candidates running for Congress from both parties. A few are incumbents running for re-election, but most are hoping to get in Congress for the first time, like Democrat Danielle Lanier of the Cherokee Nation. She's running for a U.S. House seat in Oklahoma's 2nd District, which is a Republican district. She's looking to unseat incumbent and fellow Cherokee citizen Mark Wayne Mullen. Oklahoma is a red state, voting for Trump in 2016 and for Romney in 2012. If elected, Lanier could be that state's first female Native American member of Congress. Tribal citizens in Montana are now free to help collect ballots. A Montana court permanently struck down the state law that severely restricted the practice of ballot collections. Tribal citizens depend on others to help get their ballots to the polling sites or the post office. On average, collectors were picking up about 85 ballots. The organization, Western Native Voice, took the issue to court with the election nearly a month away.
I could think of some elders or some disabled people or some people that don't have transportation or even the stamp or the $5 in gas to get to the polling station. It's overwhelming when I think about it, what obstacles we have in our path when it comes to our daily existence.
2 lawmakers are addressing cultural genocide against Native Americans with a new bill. It calls for a look at the intergenerational trauma caused by policies, including the government-run boarding schools. Representative Deb Haaland from New Mexico and Senator Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts authored the Truth and Healing Commission on Indian Boarding School Policy in the United States Act. In the late 1800s, children were prevented from practicing their cultures and speaking traditional languages. They were forced to assimilate into mainstream American culture at these boarding schools. The bill would create a first-of-its-kind commission to improve public awareness and education. The bill has bipartisan support from Oklahoma Representatives Tom Cole and Mark Wayne Mullen, who are both Native Americans. And those are the headlines from Indian Country today for Thursday, October 8th. I'm Patty Thalahungva. When we come back, how are Native-owned businesses doing in this pandemic? We'll talk with the Vice President of the National Center. The unemployment numbers are up and business is down in this pandemic. The economic impact is being measured in many ways, and the question many are asking is, what's the future? A few months ago, more than 400 Native-owned businesses took part in a survey by the National Center for American Indian Enterprise Development. They answered questions about lost revenue, furloughs, and layoffs, and they also commented on the types of assistance they need or are receiving, including credit. To tell us what the survey revealed, we have Chad Marchand with us today, and he is the Vice President of the National Center for American Indian Enterprise and Development based in Mesa, Arizona. Welcome, Chad.
Hey, thank you for having me. I appreciate it, and good morning. Yes, correct. I'm the Vice President of the National Center, and this past summer we were able to partner with the Center for Indian Country Development at the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. That survey took place over the course of the summer, and we're able to actually gather 400 responses from that survey that took place. The findings itself, to go through those a little bit with you, about 68% of our respondents reported at least 20% revenue loss over that course of time. 16% actually experienced 100% loss during the course of COVID over the past few months. 41% of our respondents to the survey were either furloughed or actually laid off as employees as a result of the pandemic during that time. And 36% of our businesses surveyed applied for a loan actually through the Federal Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP, with 22% actually receiving a loan after they applied. Nearly half, about 48% of the respondents believe their businesses are more than 6 months away from returning to normal relative to 1 year ago. About 27% predicting actually businesses will never return to normal. And so for us, it's a clear indication that businesses really need our help. They really need our continued help before they're anywhere close to returning to normal. And the National Center is doing our part, hopefully, and I can explain some of that, hopefully getting them back and running.
Well, let's go back to just who do you serve? How large are these Native-owned businesses in terms of revenue and also employees?
Yeah, so it's kind of a wide spectrum. And so we, through our several programs, and I can get into a little bit more, is we have our Native Edge Institute program, which does really on the ground programmatic work throughout the country. Before COVID hit, before pre-March, we were doing pretty much one training a month, and those range from Florida to Alaska. This next year, we're looking at going back to Alaska actually California, Louisiana. And so the trainings are pretty much all around the country. And those range from pretty much entrepreneurs just getting started, thinking about a business, to multi-billion-dollar organizations that have hundreds of employees. And so it is something where it is kind of a wide range of spectrum depending on the programmatic mechanism they're engaging with us. We do have a PTAC program, which is our Procurement Technical Assistance Program. That's been around about 25 years. They actually did a survey themselves internally for their clients, and their clients are around 1,000 people within that client base themselves. This last year, between FY19 and FY20, they reported almost a loss of about, let me get my numbers straight, about almost $40 million in loss in contracts alone to tribally owned businesses. That's about 42 less awards going to those businesses overall from FY19 and FY20.
And tell us a little bit about the kinds of business that these tribal people are operating. So anything, you talked about the small business, just getting started, to the larger multi-million-dollar corporations. What kinds of business are they into?
Yeah, so a couple of examples, like I said, they do range in expertise and what they're actually engaging in. We have a couple of businesses that we do work with. For example, like there's Natives Gas Technologies. They're working with Navajo Nation to ensure that their vulnerable communities have access to low-cost propane. We have another one called Titan Facility Services, who stepped up and they actually work in cleaning military installations during the pandemic. We also have Heritage Distillery, which transitioned to actually making hand sanitizer during the pandemic. And another one we have, for example, is B&B Health Services in Tennessee. They actually shifted a lot of their focus to PPP as well, and also doing surgical equipment, especially given the demand that's taken place over the summer. I think point out beyond those businesses also, we heavily engage with tribal gaming enterprises. This summer I spent some time visiting and working with a few of the casinos around the country. For example, I met with Grayton Casino out of northern San Francisco, as well as Coshada out of Louisiana. And so it's right before the hurricane actually hit down there, before they were impacted by that. But we also engage in that kind of work as well.
All right, and it's in the very beginning of the pandemic, there was a really huge demand for PPE, and you have on your website a link that talks about procuring proper PPE. Is that still an issue? Are tribal-owned businesses still having a hard time getting proper PPE?
It's something where, it is a project we had beginning this summer. After I think we began that in May through a grant we received, but the National Center was able to come up with the PPE guide that you referenced. We developed that, and we also partnered with Project N95. They're a nonprofit that does a huge vetting service for PPE product. That was an issue early on, as you mentioned. Currently, right now, I believe it's still something where casinos are still, and also tribally owned, governments and businesses are still going after that equipment. The casinos I just mentioned that I visited that I was working with this summer, is something that they're still heavily engaged in. And so it's still a product that you still have to procure and hopefully protect your customers and provide that kind of equipment for them. So that's going to be a continued effort from now until we get out of this COVID-19 pandemic.
And based on the results of your survey, what's the economic confidence for the short term, and define short term?
Yeah, I think that's a question that a lot of people are asking around the country. I think there's still a lot of answers that are still left kind of out there. I think based on the survey results that we had and the kind of numbers I went over and the contracting numbers through our PTAC program, it's something where it's definitely our tribal businesses definitely need further assistance, to continue their efforts and sustaining a business and hopefully flourishing after they get out of COVID-19. So I think short-term wise, I would just continue to advocate for continued work in economic development and funding to those industries. As I mentioned, one of the biggest glaring outcomes, I think, of the actual PPP program was that loan percentage rate. Only about 36 businesses actually applied for the loan, and 22% only received the loan. And so that's a huge issue thing going forward. And if more funding was able to come down to those businesses, I think that'd be great for them. I think also something I failed to mention was going forward beyond the loan itself, I think is continued education. That's what the National Center is providing. I think as long as we can provide access to the ongoing education, access to partnership with capital entities, and that's one of the biggest issues I think that came up as well was the 22% that received the loans, had that existing relationship with the financial entity already.
Well, in the idea of loans, they have to be paid back at some point. And we talked about the short-term economic confidence. What about the long-term economic confidence? And for those who did apply for those loans, that added burden of having to pay back as they're still trying to build up.
You're exactly correct. And I think I went back to the survey results as well, and they were pretty glaring that, about half believe that businesses are about 6 months away from returning if everything goes right, I think. And, we're still not out of the woods with the pandemic now. There's still predictions on whether a second wave comes. But even now that survey results, almost 30% are predicting that they won't return to normal. And so long term, that's already a huge impact on a lot of our businesses going forward. 30% are already saying they're not going to return to business. And that's predicted both in the survey. It's also indicative of our PTAC clients with contracting. About a third of them are indicating they won't return to normal as well.
Wow. And so what kind, that's just, these numbers are just, through the roof when you're looking at how our native business is going to survive. And this is just more than an economic downturn. This is a pandemic. How does any business actually plan for a pandemic?
You're exactly right. I commend a lot of our businesses that we're working with and seeing throughout the summer that we've, contacted and worked with through our NEI program, our PTAC program. Hear stories. I think and I always preach this, is that some of the casinos that I worked with, they were on the cutting edge of technology and trying to protect their customers and going forward. So for example, the Great Casino out of California I mentioned, they were doing masks were required in all the casinos. They're doing contact tracing. They're taking photographs of customers coming in and doing the contact tracing there. So as far as technology goes, I think our businesses were doing and responding the best they could. For small businesses, of course, we had roughly 22% that took advantage of the PPP loan. That's a good sign for those. I think we got to get more engaged in that and actually securing loans going forward. But I think as far as how do you respond to, I think a lot of businesses we worked with did the best they could with the resources they had and securing that equipment to protect the customers they work with.
Yeah, it's almost a catch-22. We've interviewed other business owners, say in Alaska, who knew that their entire business was gone because the cruise line industry shut down, and that's who their customers are. And so just having to pack up their business and say, you know what, we can't even really put it online because that entails another skill set. So a lot of interesting situations going on across Indian country when it comes to small business and then the larger business programs there, or businesses itself. Talk a little bit about the Native American Business Incubators Program Act that the National Center has also worked on.
Yeah, so that was just recently, as was in the news in a lot of industries around the country. That Incubators Act was actually passed, I believe, about a couple weeks ago, if I'm correct. It's something where it was legislation that was actually help establish business incubators cater to the needs of Indian country. The legislation actually was worked on for many years. National Center was a big proponent or advocate of that. Going forward, is like I mentioned, it was passed by the House and it was recently passed by the Senate. Creating incubators will be a big step forward. A lot of our Native American communities and businesses around the country are entrepreneurs. And, I think that establishing that kind of education and technology and availability of resources will be great. We are doing our part, I think, right now with our Native Edge Institutes. I think more education is always going to be needed, and resources are always going to be needed to get people more involved in the field of entrepreneurship. So I think hopefully, we'll continue to advance for funding in that program. Hopefully funding will come down, the road with that and be able to advance more businesses. If we're losing, 30% of our businesses as reported by the survey, that those types of programs are heavily needed and funding is definitely needed going forward.
All right. So we'll keep an eye on that and see if that gets signed by the president or what may happen with that, especially as you mentioned, as other businesses are going away. So how will that proceed? Well, Chad Marchand, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate it, and have a good rest of your day.
All right, thank you so much. And when we come back, how you can help report offensive Native costumes this Halloween, and more from our intern, Callie Benelli. Callie Benali is an intern with Indian Country Today, and she joins us now to talk about some of the stories she's recently written. Welcome, Callie.
Hi, Patty. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's October, and it's a time when many Indigenous people kind of brace themselves for what costumes they may be seeing come Halloween. And even in this pandemic, there's sure to be people who are dressing up. What's new this year?
Well, Pinterest has added a new feature to help users pin different posts that might contain culturally insensitive costumes. And so that may include Native American costumes. Colby Kicking Women, one of our reporters, did a story about how there are appropriated costumes for Native Americans and how there was once an Instagram filter that had some Native American imagery to be shown as like a costume. And so it's been part of the culturally insensitive costume categories.
And so, a lot of people are getting ready to put their costume together. And your story pointed out that actually in 2016, Pinterest started flagging culturally insensitive costumes. What kind of response did they have at that point?
It was just advertisements. So it didn't allow, I wouldn't say it was a big move, but it was still, I think it was a little more subtle. But now this new feature has directly given the users more power in deciding which ones are culturally insensitive. And also they have improved their feature feed, which when you choose a costume that you like and maybe it is culturally insensitive and you search for a new one, it will improve your feed and make sure that it doesn't show up again or it doesn't show a similar one. So this one is a little more, I would say, interactive and a little more smart.
And that's they're calling it their new ideas button.
Yes, the ideas feature.
All right. So in the past it was more geared towards advertisements for costumes. So what has been the response so far for this month?
Well, it's only been active for about a week. I haven't seen any big responses yet. I would assume as we get closer to Halloween that I think it'll be a lot more noticeable.
All right. Well, so we'll keep an eye on that and see, what is happening on Pinterest there. Now, we're in this election season here. Indian Country Today is following a lot of different races, and tribes are also holding tribal elections. You wrote a story recently about one tribe that made history. What was that history?
Well, the Seneca Cayuga Nation, which is based in Oklahoma, elected its first female chief, Sarah S. Channing. And the tribe has been chartered for about 83 years. And so this is the first female chief ever for them.
And originally Senecas were on the East Coast, and there is a band of Seneca Indians today in New York, but this particular band was pushed all the way into Oklahoma. So they are now calling that area home. And how many people do they have nationwide in enrollment?
About 5,500.
So the Seneca Nation, they are a matrilineal society, and we know that many tribes across the country have women in power. So it's interesting to see that the Seneca Cayugas have elected their first female chief in this modern government. But you and I both come from tribes that are matrilineal.
The Navajo are matrilineal. I'm not completely aware of the tribal government history and how many Native women are in power, but it is in the modern day, there still aren't many women who have leadership roles. So I think this new election is both historical for the tribe and also, I think, just the modern day leadership government roles.
So tell us what else you're working on, Callie.
So I am in charge of the obituaries for it's called the Portraits from the Pandemic, and so I cover Native deaths who have died from the coronavirus, and so I'm working on a couple of those. I'm also working on one of the youngest chairmans elected. He's 28 years old, and so that will be coming next week.
All right. Well, Callie Benally, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves. Your life is precious. I'm Patty Thalahungva. Join us again tomorrow.
Indian Country Today is recorded at the Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center in Phoenix, Arizona.
This is Indian Country Today.